Hi peeps. So it's been a while since I did a video, and a lot's gone on. I know a lot of us are having different experiences during this pandemic, the lockdown, not lockdown, the unfolding back and forth. I had COVID, mild to moderate symptoms. I know some of you had much worse than I did. I know one person in particular who had much worse than I did. And some of you are just dealing with lockdown and the issues of that, which is enough, but not having had COVID. Conversely, regarding lockdown, I'm one of the people who's privileged to be able to have been working from home. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm especially grateful for Humana, the company that I'm working for, and the team that I'm working on, my HTA team, and in particular my audits team, and my supervisor, my boss. They've all been wonderful. So I've had the support of that in my life, going through all this. I know some of you are out of jobs or at home all the time with no demands on your time, which is a mixed blessing. I know also that obviously there's a lot going on with what happened with George Floyd and the protests, and I've done a separate video on that. If you want to look for my video called The Danger of Being Right. There's a lot to say about that. And but obviously for me, I have the privilege of that being a learning experience rather than it being something that I have had to live with for my lifetime. So that's a way in which our experiences might be different. Conversely, where some have been afraid of police, others have been afraid of the protests. Where some are afraid of what the government is doing, others are afraid of what the virus is doing. There's just a lot of fear that is very human in a situation like this. I'm not making fear wrong. I think I've talked about that a little before, that love and fear are two different ways to look at feelings. Like, is this coming from fear? Is this coming from love? To notice what brings up a resourceful state versus what has me disengage and feel disempowered or lack of freedom in handling my experience. So love tends to be empowering and fear tends to be disempowering. That's a simplification, but these are questions worth looking at when you're looking at your emotional state. So there's a lot that we're all going through, and we're going through very different things. But where a lot of my videos are sharing from stuff that I've learned over decades, because I've been playing with consciousness and self-healing and my spirituality since I was a kid, especially since I was a teenager. And other stuff that I've learned for years and other stuff that I've learned in recent times. Well, this video is different. This video is about very recent. Like my current experience, this is stuff that I'm still learning about. Like, I don't really know that I've got all the answers about this, but it's my frontier. And so this is a video about sharing some of my frontier of what it's like to go through what I've been going through and to still have spirituality be resourceful for me. And some of it has to do with what I'm starting to call our familiar fillers. Lots of people have lots of names for this. Pema Chodron talks about Shenpa, the experience of being hooked by something. The Handbook to Higher Consciousness, he talks about addictions in a very broad sense. He really raises the bar on our personal freedom and says that anything that has me be unhappy is an addiction. Like there's some thing inside me, some attachment or some aversion that's driving my suffering, and that to get free of that is upgrading an addiction to a preference. You know, that's a very demanding, very, very empowering, but very demanding way to look at that. So, you know, these familiar fillers, they can be addiction, something I'm attached to, something that I'm avoiding, someplace where I'm running away from feelings, or someplace where I'm chasing after feelings, some way that I'm resisting, some way that I'm clinging. But, you know, it's not all bad. I mean, Howard Glasser wrote a book on positive addictions. You know, like exercise can be a positive addiction. Gardening can be a positive addiction. Sex and intimacy can be positive addictions. You know, obviously, any one of these things can be taken to extremes. And there are other things like Facebook, YouTube, TV, you know, that may not have as many rewards as exercise does, for example. But they still are what I would call minor supports. You know, Facebook, it's good to have people like your post on Facebook. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. And if that's my ground zero, if that's what I depend upon as my first support, then I've taken something that's a minor support and I've turned it into a major support. And it gets to be diminishing returns. And more than that, not only is it diminishing returns, but it gets to be something that, well, I'm going to talk about this soon, that I go to for rest and I actually get out of it restlessness. So, there are 4 things I'm going to talk about. One of these things is kind of challenging, and as always with my videos, if you run into something that you experience as challenging, feel free to message me on Facebook. I'm up for doing some support of anybody who's working with the work that I'm presenting. You know, I want to make sure everybody's taken care of, and especially during this epidemic or pandemic, whichever one you want to call it. I want people to know that they have support internally from within themselves, and that they have support from me to help them tune into that support inside themselves, especially if you're playing with any of the toys from my work, you know. And so here in this video, I'm going to present 4 toys, 3 of which are new for me, one of which is very new for me, and one of which is very old for me. You know, I've been playing with one of these for over a decade. The first of these is what I'm going to call Courageous Gentleness. And this has to do with how to relate to time in a way that's resourceful and that draws on the resources of the moment. Like, if you've watched my other videos, you've heard me talk about how when we are being, not just being present, but being presence. When we're being presence, we have the ability not just to relate to the moment. Presence has the ability to be related to time. And, you know, to say that the moment is all there is, for me, that's a breakdown. For me, that's playing it small. The moment is where I touch into my resources, is where I discover all the resourcefulness that's available to me, you know, whether you call it God or whether you call it the realm of transformation, or which is what Landmark would call it, or if you call it the unmanifested, which is what Eckhart Tolle calls it in The Power of Now. This resourcefulness that's available to us in the moment. You know, that's why we start where we are. That's why it's great to accept what is, to ride the horse in the direction that it's going in. Not because that's a place to stop, not because I'm resigned, not because I think that what is all there is. There's also possibility, but a possibility starts where I am. To start where I am and accept possibility, now I have the resourcefulness of the moment, and now I can bring it to time. I can bring that to how I deal with time. So, first of the tools that I'm going to talk about is, I'm now going to go through the work of the 4 tools. As I often do in my videos, I'm going to do the work present the work at the beginning, so you can, if you want, you can just do the work and then bail. You know, go back to your life. Live, you know, engage in life. But then I'll go into some explanation. And then I'll redo, as I explain them each, I'll redo each of them. So if you want, you can get them twice. But, otherwise, if you feel free to jump to another of my videos or jump back to life. So the first one is courageous gentleness. And the invitation here is to notice when you might have a readiness to get engaged in life, but it doesn't always feel that way. Like we really want all the green lights to be set up before we take action. We really want a sense of, I know what I'm doing and I know how to do it and I feel right about it. But it's not always that way. We have the ability to engage, but we don't always feel like it. And so courageous gentleness, I'll talk more about. Play with that, try that on. The second tool, which I'm going to talk about later, is to notice when you go to a familiar filler, like Facebook, like TV, like, as my socks say, look inside the fridge. Food is a familiar filler, literally. And when I say literally, that's really literally familiar filler with food. The thing to notice about familiar fillers is we think that we go to them for the pleasure involved, and what we are not always present to is that we also are going to them because they're familiar. We go to them because they're safe. Like if I'm somewhat addicted to Facebook on a given day, feeling impulsive or driven to go see if anybody replied to my Facebook post or something like that. That drive isn't just because it's pleasure and I'm drawn to it. It's also because maybe an uncertainty came up in my workday. Like, how am I being perceived, or what's the right path here? I don't know what the answer is to this technical question. Dealing with the emotions that come with uncertainty in life, or dealing with disappointment in life, or dealing with, what I said before, talk about uncertainty. How much uncertainty do we have these days? This is a huge thing that comes up. And to notice that we go to the familiar fillers for safety. They're certain. We know where we are. To be in a small world that's a familiar world. The familiar world of this sensation. So the work there is notice when you are drawn to a familiar filler. Ask yourself, is there a wanting of safety, security, and survival? And to whatever extent underneath or in this drive, is there a sense of wanting of safety, security, and survival? To just let that be an experience of wanting right now. To want safety, security, survival, however much I do right now. And then ask myself, for example, one of the ways to handle this is to ask yourself the 3 questions that are next in the Sedona method, which is, could I let it go, would I let it go, and when? So, first, could I let it go? Could I let go of this wanting? First, allow it. Let it be here again. Let it be freshly present. And however much it's here right now, could I let this go? Just could I? It feels like there's a possibility. I could. And would I let it go? Like, is there a willingness? Yeah, I'm willing to let this go. I would. I would let go. And when? And even if it feels a little bit like I could let go of it right now, let go of it however much I do. And again, is there a wanting of safety, security, survival? Is there any residual of that? Sometimes it takes more than one pass. Sometimes it'll take one pass. Sometimes it'll take 5. Passes to get some freedom around it. The wanting of safety, security, survival. Could I allow it? Yes. I might even allow it even more than that. And however much it's here right now, however much I'm allowing it right now, Could I let this go? Yes. Would I let it go? Yes. And when? Now. So letting it go right now. And however much it goes. You know, I'm not making it go away. What I'm really letting go of is my grip on it. It's free to come or it's free to stay. I'm just letting go of my grip on it so that it's free to move. I'm giving it, first I'm allowing it, giving it the space to be, and then I'm releasing it, giving it the freedom to flow. So that's the second one, is notice in a familiar feeler, notice the wanting of security, of safety, and allow and release the feeling of wanting. The third one that is in my current frontier, and this is, the second one was one that I've done for years. This third one is one that's very new for me. And that is that in the drive to go to a familiar feeler, to notice the restlessness that's in that, to let myself feel the restlessness that's in it, and then to notice that in that restlessness, there is a wanting of rest. So first, notice that I'm wanting to go to a familiar feeler. Second, notice the restlessness that's in that. Let myself feel the restlessness. Notice the wanting of rest. Now, in this case, I'm not suggesting that you allow and release a wanting. In this case, I'm suggesting that we use that wanting. That wanting of rest is a doorway. It is a launching off point into rest. Like, allow the restlessness, then allow the feeling of wanting rest, and let myself be driven by that wanting of rest. So now, what will bring me this rest that I want? Might it be taking a break that's an actual pause? Because, we take breaks to go on Facebook. We take breaks to go on YouTube. We take breaks to talk to a friend. We take, these things have varying degrees of actual rest in them. We take breaks to exercise or clean up the kitchen sink, or, there's lots of ways to ground yourself to get rest. But not all of these ways of taking a break are actually taking a pause. So that's one thing to notice, is this taking a pause. That's a source of rest. But in any case, and I'm going to talk about space. And that's the fourth one, because that's a source of rest. And the experience, and this is intuitive, this may not be real for you, but I'll talk about this more later, that space is always here. And that there is this sense of spaciousness that I can tune into that's always here, that I can go to that for that sense of the rest that I want. The rest that I want is always here in the spaciousness that is here. So that's the fourth one. So, coming back, circling back, now to get into explanations. And by the way, the goal is, we just did the work. I offered the work, if you'd actually tuned into any of those four things while I was talking about them, you might have already gotten what you wanted to get out of this video. Feel free to bail. Feel free to go back to life, go listen to another video, do the work in something else, go have fun. The gains from these videos are enjoyment, freedom, resourcefulness, like discovering your inner support, and resourcefulness, like being engaged in life. So inner support and resourcefulness for life. And ultimately the game is to be able to explore and play. Live a life where you have some sense where you can explore and play. So go have fun if you want to. Getting into the explanations, and we will revisit the work. Courageous Gentleness. For me, Courageous Gentleness is in some ways similar to something that Landmark used to teach, which was Relentless Compassion. And I think Relentless Compassion was semi-workable for me, and Landmark eventually dropped the distinction. But Courageous Gentleness has some of the same traits for me, and that is that in being present, there's no rushing and no waiting. But in taking action or doing something, getting into our plan for the day, that's not just the moment anymore. Now we have to have a relationship to time as well as the moment. So instead of just being present, now we're talking about being presence. And how does presence engage? Well, sometimes I'm really tuned in. Sometimes I've got presence and relatedness and possibility. Sometimes I've got love in the mix, and I've got sources of love in the mix, but it's not always that way. Sometimes it's, I just woke up, I woke up a little later than I thought, or I was, doing my exercise or whatever, and you know what? It's time. It's the time that I set for doing that. Or it's the time that I promised I would do that. And the feelings aren't all lined up. So, we've learned to just get into action on the schedule. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Jumping in, trusting that it's going to be okay, trusting that I can be engaged in a resourceful way. It doesn't have to just be that I touch base with my resources during meditation or emotional processing. It can be that I touch base with my resources in the stream of life. You trust that, and that can be a great way to live your life. But sometimes we just don't feel like it. And I think a lot of us know what it's like to just push our way through. That's good too. That's a resourceful way to jump into things. Okay, it's cool, just getting it done. That's cool. And what I'm presenting is that when we do that, when we push through our feelings to get into action, it sometimes works better than others. And I'm presenting a moderation on that approach of courage. Like, yes, I can courageously get started and engage in action, but it doesn't mean that I have to push through my feelings for the entire day. I can make the choice, regardless of whether feelings are ready. And then in the being engaged in it, I can be gentle enough that I'm related to life. I'm not just pushing through for the entire day. So courageously initiating, courageously getting engaged, and then engaging with a gentleness that lets there be a relatedness to life. So, if any real major emotional warning signs come up, like, well, it's a feeling sign, but it isn't an emotional sign, like I'm hungry, I'm still engaged enough to notice, Getting into the zone in work or in avocation or vocation is an imbalance that's worth having. I'm not saying that you need to always be engaged in your feelings. Getting in the zone is an imbalance worth having. And I am presenting that there's one of the choices that's available here is what I'm calling courageous gentleness, where you get started, you get engaged in life, and then you engage in life in a related way, related to what's going on. I think that's all I have on that. So again, presenting it as a tool. Notice if there's a choice that you have that is coming up for you right now, and if I have a choice that's coming up for me right now that I don't feel ready for, but it feels like it's time, or I know from my agreements with others that it's time, then to just trust, either trust or courage, to go into being engaged and engaging, trusting that I can engage in with enough gentleness that I'm related to what's going on. So that's the tool there. So coming back to the second one, this is the one that I've been getting benefit out of for years, and that is to notice when I go to a familiar filler, is there a wanting of security that's driving it? Like, I'm not just going to it for pleasure, I'm going to it for familiarity and safety. Um, and in that case, to allow the wanting of safety and to let that be a feeling of wanting. And could I let that wanting go? And would I? And when? And if I'm going too fast, feel free to play that back and, play back the video at slow speed. The wanting of security is a healthy wanting. I'm not saying get rid of all drives to security. I'm saying notice when wanting becomes consciousness dominating, or that it gives me a lack of freedom or power. Then, when there's a lack of freedom or power, freedom of choice, then it's a good time to allow and release a wanting of safety, security, survival. Just enough to get back to still being engaged and not feeling that I'm recoiling from the experience or that I'm driven to the experience. The third one, which again, that was in going to a familiar feeler. Is there a restlessness? Feel the restlessness. Tune into the wanting of rest. This is a rich one. There's a lot of richness there. There's a lot of using that wanting of rest to drive to a restful choice. It's taking a disadvantage and flipping it into an advantage. Restlessness, great, has a wanting of rest. Boom. It's a great reframe, it's a great flip. And where a lot of that resourcefulness shows up is in resourceful rests. And this is showing up in a lot of places in my life, like knowing that rest is part of the balance, like possibility I've talked a lot about inspiring possibilities, like the resourceful states. Like for me, my building block possibilities that I work with a lot are being grounded, being creative, being effective, being loving, being receptive, expressive, aware, and connected. I'm going to go through those again. Grounded, creative, effective, loving, receptive, expressive, aware, connected. Those resourceful states are a source of energy, but they're also a place to rest. They are vast spaces. You can learn to rest in a possibility of being just as much as you draw on the energy of a possibility of being. And so those are places to go when you're engaged in life. I mean, yes, sure, being present as the one who is presence, simple presence has rest in it. And life is about being, and life is also about doing. So those building block possibilities are a way that I connect being to doing. Like if I'm being creative, maybe it's also a time to be grounded. If I'm being loving, maybe it's also a time to be expressive. If I'm being connected, maybe it's also a time to be effective. To have these balancing possibilities where I go to for what brings energy into the body and where I go to for what gives me some spaciousness and some rest. Which brings me to the fourth one, which is noticing that in emptiness there is space. In emptiness there is a place to rest. This is another example of taking a disadvantage and turning it into an advantage. Taking an unresourceful experience of like, this feels like emptiness, I don't like that, and flipping it. Noticing that in emptiness there is space. This has been a huge resource for me during this time of here I am, We've got the stress of the virus and the stress of the people who are reacting and the stress of, for some it's the stress of the government, and for some it's the stress of the government not doing enough, and for some it's the stress of their lives feeling threatened by a virus or by the police, and for some it's the police, their feeling of being threatened by protesters. They're called to step into situations which they don't know what they don't know. The protesters and the police are both in these situations of uncertainty, facing each other, and they don't know if the other side can be trusted. Some of them choose to be trusting anyway, or courageous anyway, and I have great respect for both the protesters and the police who've stepped up courageously to face each other, or gently to face each other. These are amazing times. Don't miss this. And so, getting related to what's here is a lot to let in. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed, to be full beyond your capacity to be full. And that's one of the places that draws us to these familiar fillers. And to notice when something feels full, the restlessness that's there, and then notice the wanting of rest, or when something feels empty, to notice the space that's there. It gives a place to rest. So both the filling of emotions has this restlessness and wanting of rest to draw on, and the emptiness of emotions has this spaciousness and place to rest in it. And to let that be a mix and balance and an iteration. So you draw on energies that feed you when they do, and you draw on the emptiness that gives you the space to be. Because when I tune into emptiness as a space to be, a space for possibility, and it's giving myself the space to be, what then can start to happen is that restlessness can start to unwind into the space. You're actually giving place for the overwhelm, or you're giving yourself space to decompress. Like it starts to unwind, it can unravel, it can decompress, and it starts to be more approachable. Your experience starts to be more accessible. It starts to be more relatable. Like you can deal with people who are different, others who are having different experiences, people who are having fears that are different from my fears. When I start to allow that fear or that drive to unwind in the spaciousness of emptiness,